Hello, my name is Shinay Trudeau, and I'm joined with Bhavani Maki for another session of the Yogi's Roadmap podcast. Welcome, friends and practitioners. Thank you for choosing to spend your time with us today. Bhavani, such a pleasure and an honor to be with you.
Oh, I love being with you too, Shinay. I've been getting lots of great feedback from people who are like, oh, we listen to, I listen to every episode and I need to listen to that one again. So it's super, we would do this just to do this for our own joy, but I'm glad that, it's nice to hear that people are enjoying it as well, because we
So
never know what's going to happen.
it's so true. And I'll put a little plug. It always helps people to find the podcast if you leave a 5-star review and write something. So I'll just put that out there. Thank you all.
Awesome. We almost need directions on that because people have asked me how, and I'm like, I don't actually know.
It's a little weird. I know on iTunes, and I don't actually know how to do it on Spotify. I mean, YouTube, you can just do the comments, but that's a good idea. Let's do that.
Okay.
So, you have said to me over the years, we overestimate what we can do in a day and underestimate what we can do in a lifetime. This statement has always been very freeing for me personally, yet it also brings up some regret on not having been able to galvanize specifically in my life the last 10 years as I might have envisioned when I was much younger. And I want you to talk to me about regret on the yogic path.
Well, I regret that I don't have something wonderful to say, but let's see where it goes. Um, you know, I was actually talking with a wonderful woman yesterday who was sharing how much she enjoyed the podcast and all of that. And we were, kind of looking at some cycles, and she'd been through a big cycle this past year, as you and I, as of lovers of astrology, know. There's constellations in our life, and there's waves, and there's, we can see it in children, how there's cycles of development, etc. And then there's even cycles where it seems like there's a regression. But one of the things that came to heart for me was how, because everything is so accelerated now, and the way, we're bombarded with the feed, and you have to be um like everything. And also Americans, I was listening to this one Dutch guy talk, and he was like, with Americans, oh, and also this Finnish comedian, like, with Americans everything's like amazing and fantastic and mind-blowing, and it and it's like there's almost like a hollowness to it, because it's one of the beautiful things about our culture, in the way that we're innovators and we're a little bit younger and newer, and so it's always about that. But also being okay when things are just level and even. So sometimes the breakthrough is just being like, no news is good news, or understanding also that we're going to have periods of gestation. We're going to have periods of review, and being okay with, like, that not being productive can also be productive. And that being said, it sounds like I'm dissing the American way, but, my parents very much had a strong work ethic. And when I was a little kid, it was like, being asked, what are you doing? And when I responded, nothing, I was encouraged to do something. So a lot of times, I think we can, that sense of vritti, which is like to move in a circular way, or the action, in like modern colloquialism, it can also mean your job and what you do. So this sense of like being constantly active, being constantly productive. And what we do is we, according to Ayurveda, is we're speeding up the aging process, because there's this sense of like anxiety. And there's also a sense of excitement. Yeah, that like we don't want to be a bottom feeder. We want to be productive. But like, how do we look at the longer arc and the longer rhythms? And I'm sure you feel this all the time as a mother. It's like, you look around, there's endless things to clean up. And yet there's this sense of like, wow, this is a really special moment with my kid. What's more valuable than that? Let me just be in that moment. I'm definitely feeling it myself. I've got an immersion training starting in a few days. I agreed to give an astrology reading, which, for me, it's like a lot of study and preparation. I'm in a hot phase in my manuscript. I have a lot I want to do there. There's like so many things that I want to do and prepare. I'm probably going to be going back to America to do some more of the structural integration training, pick up where I left off in January. It's all so overwhelming. And I just have to kind of like go, whoa, like, let me just stay where I am and be focused. Because the sense of overwhelm can just actually be more deranging in the end. But looking back on regret, you know, talk about the vritti that digs you into a hole, but then at the same time, like there's a level of productiveness around it, which is like, I mean, I'm going to be turning 57 in the spring, and digging deep into this structural integration training, it's going to be a year and a half for me to do all of the, like, everything that I've done means nothing as far as accreditation. It's like, got to take, all these like college level anatomy and physiology classes. It means nothing that I've taught it for decades. Means nothing. Means nothing that I've had other people come and teach it and that I've been studying it for decades. So, and then I'm just like, oh my God, do I really want to do this? No. Yes and no. But then when I like kind of reframe and I go, all right, it's only a year and a half, and looking back at all of those times where I could have done that and how time just kind of like accumulates, it gives you a sense of like, it's only time, and I have like I could postpone it or I could do it now. These are all part of like the being able to keep it at a comfortable level of tension.
Mm.
You know what I mean? And being able to look at hindsight, and instead of, it's like, if there's a choice we're making in life constantly, are we going towards the wound or are we going towards the healing? And making that choice for ourselves, and making that instead of just because of the feeling behind it of wanting to give ourselves compassion or someone else, making a conscious choice around that. It sounds so the weak tea bag wisdom that you can't change the past, but at the same time, it's really true. It's being able to like pace yourself in the moment. I think our relationship with time is a really interesting thing. We tend to look at it as being such a linear arc, but really it's like the sutra. It's spherical. It's there can be, and you and I know that like you can stretch time. You can actually stretch time sometimes, where there's no way you could complete something in time, but somehow you do when you get out of this sense of like hypertonic tension around it. So regret, plenty, bags and bags of it, but like getting buried there and instead being able to like hold it loosely and realize the gravity of the moment. And it's like in the Kaivalyapada, and being able to let yourself be guided and pulled by that gravity, like you're leaning into it. Um, I don't know. It's probably a really good question for me right now, because it's one thing that I had to learn when I was going through the perimenopause, and my whole nervous system was like so dysregulated, was I really had to land in this moment. And I really had to, if I started thinking about the laundry list of everything I had to do, it would just completely undo me. So it's kind of like prioritizing what needs to be done now, sitting with it, giving yourself to that, knowing that there's going to be time to do what needs to be done. And I guess, like, how can I be in this moment without creating future regret? Oh, there's a sutra for that, isn't there? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Can't do much about the past regret. Um, even like, it's like I'm coming to a really great point in my first pada that I'm writing, and then I'm like, oh my God, I have 3 more pada to write. I might not get to it in this lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to. And as soon as I go there, what I'm doing now is rushed and it's incomplete and it requires redoing. So giving ourselves grace in this moment, I think, just has to really be, that practice of serenity. What's it too soon for? What's it too late for? What's it the time for? And being able to be in that place. And something else that I really learned, in um my own recovery from being an enabler, was that, like, there's certain things that if I go there and I'm like, why did it take so long? Or my resentments about another person, or my resentments about myself, and my, like, the obsessiveness over it, like, it's just unkind. It's unkind to me. So there's a sutra for that. Yogas chitta vritti nirodhaha, right? Like, what's useful, what's unuseful, what creates further distortion. And knowing that, like, I could easily spiral if I let myself go there. And it's just not kind
Mm-hmm.
to myself or to others, right? So it's like, okay, it's, in some ways, it's just such a simple formula, but really taking care of our inner state. That to me is the second sutra.
Mm-hmm.
Taking care of your inner state. Whenever you're upregulated, you're going to probably have regret, right? Because when you're moving from that place of trauma, you're like stunted from where you didn't do the growth, or it was too much, or it was too big, or it was something imposed on you, or whatever it was. And also, like they say, trauma's healed in the now.
Mm-hmm.
So regret can be helpful in that it can inform us in the present, but if it starts eroding our life, that's not kind,
Mm-hmm.
and that's not loving. And you could even do all of the right things. I mean, when I look back and I look at, in my 20s and my 30s and my 40s, and what I could complete in a day, like, I was so hyper productive and it was fantastic. I don't have that same kind of energy anymore. And yet, I'm more myself. And there's something more, as I'm saying the word embodied, I'm thinking of like a chrysanthemum That's just like, it's like a full bloom. It's an unfolding of consciousness. So there's an organic aspect to it. And one of the best parts I think about being a parent is that you have this real sense of like I'm always matriculating, like, oh my God, Nico's going to be 12. I only have 6 more years with him. And you kind of have this different reference when you're working with a lifetime or a certain tenure with someone, that it gives you kind of another cycle of time and rhythm within a time. But yeah, I got tons of regrets, who doesn't, but at the same time, it's like, even like in this moment, everything that I did was so untraditional. Everything that I did was in the old ways,
Mm.
sitting at the feet of my teacher, sitting next to my teacher, having like, decades of interaction and decades of personal application and study. I don't have a single paper to show for it, but I'm full.
Mhm.
And now I'm having to do that legwork, and a year and a half at the same time. It's like a year and a half is so nothing, but it's a lot when you're a mom.
Yeah.
It's a lot. So, yeah, I think also a really good thing to do, is having other colleagues and friends and confidants, and listening to their process in retrospect. I mean, I was just talking to our friend Mariana and talking about it, and I remember when she was coming out from living on the ashram, and she'd come and studied with me, and she had her doctorate in psychotherapy, but she wasn't able to practice, and she was trying to figure out what to do. And I'm like, go get your license. And, so when I was talking to her about this and how many hours it is, and she was like, I had to do like 3,000 hours. She had to do like 3,000 hours pregnant for free psychotherapy, for like immigrant farm workers who are struggling with major substance abuse, like as you're pregnant, just imagine being sitting in
Wow.
that kind of an energy. And she was able to just point blank say, and I had encouraged her to do it. I was like, are you kidding? You already have a doctorate. Like, just do this.
Mm.
But when you're in it, it feels so big and so like mammoth and unapproachable. And she was like, I've learned just like always do the legwork and just get the accreditation you need so you can do what you want to do. So
Mm.
it's nice to have others to reflect for you, because when you're in it, it just feels so overwhelming. And, when regret becomes paralyzing, excuse me, that's problematic. Yeah. I don't know if that was helpful.
That was very helpful. Very helpful. Yeah. Say more about the gathering people. I think there's a lot there to be used. Because I do know, for myself, when I think about regret and start spiraling, I often go to my husband like, whoa, like this thing is happening, or a friend or mentor and saying like, okay, like I'm really stuck. Help. Help me out of this downward situation that's no longer useful.
Yeah. And, because in those moments where we're in the churning, I wanted to say charnel churning, the charnel grounds, and we forget ourselves, right? We lose track of our inner state. So to have somebody like that who reminds you of who you are. I mean, I remember my girlfriend Suzanne, who I've known for decades, and I was really struggling to have Nico. And she was like, Bhavani, I've known you 20 years or 15 years, and you always made it happen, whatever you wanted. And I was like, oh my God, thank you. Like, thank you for reminding me who I am.
Mm.
Thank you for reminding me of everything that I've gone through, because I'm standing here on this precipice and I feel shaky. Um, so in some ways, it's like we lose our ground, but people who've got our back help us, remind us that like we can stand our ground and we can face any challenge that comes to us. Um, so they'll love us even when we aren't loving ourselves or we have that insecurity, and they can
Mhm.
remind us. I mean, that's one of the things that I love so much about our online sutra group are these relationships and the intergenerational aspects. Since I let go of the commercial space, the brick and mortar space of the yoga shala, in some ways my life has become more insular, which feels really natural. And so to have that kind of like a forum where we can connect and talk, and man, it's like they see you more than you see yourself, right? Like that's the
Mhm.
beauty of relationship, is that interrelational connection. And we don't even necessarily have to talk about that stuff, but it's like you and I, we get each other so much just being in each other's presence, being like the strange birds that we are, right? It's kind of like there's this just affirmation. I got your back, you got my back. We are both like, we both have the same tapas inside of us, and it's looked different over our lifetime, but this burning desire for something more authentic, something more primal, something really real in a world of synthetic artifice, something that's more grounded. Um, and then of course the tapas, which is like the always the most intense part of any spiritual path, is navigating those emotions in the moment. And we have the whole world pushing, with this unspoken agenda, because boy, it fills the coffers that we're not doing enough, we're not enough, we should be doing more, and we're not doing it quick enough.
Mm.
But like
Mm.
that's the tension, isn't it? So how do we keep it comfortable? um we're lucky to have that reflection with each other, right?
So blessed.
Yeah,
Do
yeah.
you feel like there's such a thing as wasted time?
Haha. Even wasting time is productive for those of us who are hyper productive. I mean, for me anyway, because I tend to be hyper productive. You know,
Hmm.
like I shared how years ago, we went to Greece. That's where we always go for our family time in the summer. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to write and I'm not going to study, because what do I do on my vacation? I'm like, oh my God, now I can really like dive into my manuscript. And and I'll spend 5, 6 hours a day writing. So doing nothing or doing something vapid is actually a great thing for me. So I think for my personality, which tends to be more rajasic, it's a really good thing. And what is wasted time anyway? I wonder,
Mm.
you know? Um, I mean, yesterday I was kind of doing that a little bit. I was just like, okay, I'm just going to watch some TV, And I was sitting there and I was tired because it's like we had a big party for Ray's birthday and the holidays and da 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 da. There's a million things to do. And I was just like, my nervous system and my body just actually needs this, you know? And no, like, I'm not going to be productive in my doing nothing or undoing. Like, that's not supposed to happen. Sorry about that. Um, like doing nothing, like meditating.
Mhm.
Like, no, I'm not even going to meditate and do nothing. I'm actually going to do nothing, something for no purpose at all.
Mm.
Just because it's that sense of almost again like the gestational period, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Where you're letting things, you're going underground and you're just waiting and you're going to let things percolate for a little while, or even, you have things to do, but it's like stealing yourself.
Mm.
Ray is such a good example of that as a tiger.
Mm.
It's like, um, if you look at tigers, it's like, they eat and then they digest for a week. And they're
Mhm.
just sitting there and they're kind of digesting. And we were talking about on Christmas Eve, and this friend was like, yeah, and in your gut, you're like separating the hair from the bone and you know what I mean? But there's things
Yeah.
happening internally
Yeah.
that aren't even happening within our own minds. And then when it's time, like we had this one friend who came to visit who fired up our sauna, and all of a sudden somebody was like, what are those flames over there? And they had overpacked the stove and the sauna was on fire. And I've never seen Ray move so fast in my life. Usually he's like ambles about,
Yeah.
but like when the time is right, being able to
Mm.
spring into action. Um, yeah, it's something that we're not really necessarily encouraged so much in the yoga world, isn't it?
Mhm. Mm-mm.
Doing,
That,
doing.
yeah. And that period, like you keep saying, that period of gestation. And for me, I keep thinking my husband Jesse is very similar to Ray in that way of he spends so much time internally separating the hairs from the bone, from the fat. And then it might be weeks or even months later, and he comes to me and he says, well, I was thinking about that thing you said, and he'll say it. And I'm like, whoa, okay, there's something really important going on internally about this learning piece. And, it happens also through conversation, I find in our conversations with each other and with other people. And sometimes I find myself like I have to say the same thing over and over and over again, or I have to tell the same stories until the learning actually gets in. And either I can see it from a new perspective or something inside actually shifts for then me to be able to use some new language around like reframing what happened. So, what happened, like, I kind of jokingly say, like, what have I been doing with the last 10 years of my life? But then I started saying it differently, like, oh, I actually, t took 4 trips to India. I was in the process of having a baby and I had a baby. We moved around a lot, Jesse, so doing kind of a different story narrative about what happened.
I think that's a really good point. We kind of were talking about this one day in the Yoga Sutra thing, where instead of like making a list of everything that you need to do, having a list of everything you did do
Mm.
is a really great practice because, it's that sense of platforming. Um, and when you do that, then you've got solid ground underneath you.
Mm.
And as far as regret, I mean, I used to say this thing, I was so naive, like in the shavasana in the early years of my teaching. It's like, when you die you don't want to have any regrets, and I'm like, are you kidding me? Of course you're going to die with a sense of regret.
Mm.
Um, but and I don't know if I mentioned this last week. If I did, please forgive me with last recording. But there was this woman who was sharing this. I think I did this story. She said it wasn't a great book or anything, but at one point in the story, they were talking about someone who had died, and one of the like relatives was like, oh, they didn't really accomplish much in their life. They didn't achieve much. And the other person reflected back and said, but they lived a beautiful life. Like their
Mm.
life was full of beauty. And I can look at you and I know that's true. I know that's so true. You have not been lukewarm or half assed about anything. And neither have I. Oh, are you weeping? Right? So, like, let's lean into that a little bit, you know? Um, give ourselves some grace. Oh, tell me what you're feeling right now.
Just to have that reflected back to me is really important. Like I was saying earlier, the importance of having community, having people I trust around to say, I see you and I see that what you've been up to, even when no one is looking. And that's really important and more useful than anything because I think having, I'm 5 months into being a mom, which is like a drop in the whole scheme of things, but I feel this this deep sense of urgency to make space for this little being in my life that is free and clear from the past regrets or the baggage to bring forward. It's like, wow, what can I create? It's almost like from nothing and having so much space and then to not carry it. I think it's useful to look at regret, like you were saying, and then see the learning that comes from what I did do or what I didn't do. And then just being able to, yeah, be around people who see me in my fullness.
Beautiful. That's it, right? The fullness. I mean, if there's an expression of yoga, it is seeing the fullness and seeing the gestalt and that sense of oh, here it is again, right? That kritatam pratinasyam antpyanasyam tadanya sadaranatvat, that we, the yogi, learns to feel, to feel into the fullness with a sense of missingness.
Mm.
So it's so wonderful to have those sutras because we're like, oh yeah, what I thought was wrong is actually what's right. And we're always struggling with this tension of this progress, linear kind of timeline. And then speaking to our own indigenous nature and soul, which was like, there's a season for everything, and taking part in that season and knowing that like they're all folding into each other in this different kind of continuity. So that's that's that place of inner fullness, right? Of it's like unfolding, and the patience, that the joy of watching how things unfold. Um, and it's so easy to let our minds go. As I'm sitting here, I can even do it for you. right? Like, because I know some of your concerns, right? It was like, where are we going to live? And then you found a place to live, and it wasn't perfect, but it was actually really good enough. And then you had your baby there, and you were like, it's all old people living here. We're going to need to move. And it's like, but like getting ahead of ourselves. So it really, if yoga gives us a tool on such a basic level, it's being able to self regulate sounds so, I don't know, clinical in some ways,
Mm.
but taking care of our inner state. And again, it's like, it's just unkind to me to do that to myself, to start going into these like places of anxiety, anticipatory anxiety, and that fear, Rama would say, it's fear
Mm.
that blocks the grace.
Mm.
So I've shared this with you before, but it's always worth sharing again. And I remember, because like then there was a point where I needed to go back to work for my own sanity and the health of the family and the economy and whatever. And a big concern is like, who's going to take care of my child? The child care is a huge thing for a mother. And my friend Elise, and she was like, don't worry, Nico's going to pull in who he needs. So, as much as it may seem like magical thinking, they're actually, we already did this one, timing is everything. But really, when you're in your place of resonance and you're tuning into your own rhythms, and then you're starting to see there's other rhythms that are happening. And I learned this word, concatenations, which is where there's grouping of rhythms within rhythms.
Mm.
Patanjali calls it rhythm. That there is an order. Like it's almost okay. It's almost like that sense of when I look back in my yoga training, and this was when it was very subtle body oriented, and there really wasn't so much of a merging of um like our own psychology with the mystical psychology and the transpersonal. I don't know, it just didn't seem as much a part of the conversation back then. It was like that bridge between um the chakra from the heart up, and then from Svadhisthana and Muladhara, the bridge being Manipura, which is the solar fire, the fire in our belly,
Mm.
right? And that's where the yogi actually makes the choice. We do have choice. There's going to be the pressures of the world, the evolutionary impulse that is constantly like won't let us get comfortable, um, wants us to diversify, wants us to be more dynamic, where we have to let go of things that aren't working anymore, and be willing to like sometimes go into the cocoon and melt and not even be the creature that we were, like we're literally dissolving before we come out as this new animal. um there's going to be those places of real humbling and being able to be like, okay, something big is about to happen. I don't know what it is, but let me like go into whatever this experience is right now. It's bigger than me. It's super humbling. It's bringing me back to ground. Like it may even be an unearthing process, or maybe just like going into a state of hibernation and dormancy. And Ishwara Pranidhana, this is bigger than me. Okay.
Mhm.
So when we look at like Radhanath Swami's translation of Ishwara Pranidhana, it means that which is discovered by moving deeply into the core of one's own being. And Rama would translate it as Ish, to wish, Wada, to fulfill, Pra, to bring forth, and Dana, the gift or the wealth. But Ish means we also have choices, right? So, like, there's that choice. Am I going to go into fear because this isn't matching up to my blueprint? Or am I going to lean into this grace because there's what I can imagine to happen, what I think should happen, what I want to happen? And then there's so like leaning into the magic of who we are, what you told me, that drala, that ordinary magic. And so that's a choice, isn't
Mm-hmm.
it? And wow, isn't it interesting that that's like where, our enteric brain sits, in that fire in the belly, which is like, the fire does need tending to. We got to feed the fire in some ways. We're always looking, what am I going to throw into the fire next? Fire needs offering. And sometimes those offerings are our own fear, our own anxiety, our own sense of I'm not going to pull it off, or I'm going to fail the people that need me. Um, so it's like, it's, we're going to feel how we feel. The feelings we can't necessarily change, but the grace that we give ourselves and we give to other, that's something that we can open up into. Not my will, but thy will. And sometimes we don't even really know what we want, right? Till something happens there. So yeah, that's like that place in our belly. Um, that's the vagus nerve. That's the wanderer, the wandering nerve, in which we're pretty unique as mammals and as pack animals, because we have the ability to hold a bigger context, right? This is unfolding. I don't know what it is yet. And parts of me are going to have to be consumed. I mean, in utero, that's the phi. It's like your tissues are consuming themselves to become something else, which was always that tula subcutanea. It was always the raw stuff of who you are. Um, yeah, take care of your inner state. I think we have a title.
Great. That's great. Thank you so much. Jai Ma.
Oof. Yeah. And thank goodness we have each other. It's like these little touch points. And speaking of touch points, right? Like, kids are so good that way. Nico blows me away, the things that he sees. He is a seer.
Yeah.
So we've been going to help this woman with her horses, and even with our dogs. Like, he sees what's going on because he's totally present.
Yeah.
And he was like, oh, that horse isn't walking well, there's something going on with that horse. And sure enough, the woman's like, oh yeah, this horse has naviculitis, bone on bone. And he sees things. Or Zito's eye looks weird and his lip is hanging, our dog. It's like he is so, I'm so loaded with all the shit I have to do. I barely see what's in front of me a lot of the time. I mean, I'm just outing myself.
Yeah.
Um, so there's even a beauty in that, isn't that? The multi-generational aspect, and being able to, that might be a really good teaching for us to take away from this, is get out of the echo chamber.
Mm-hmm.
Be with other people of different generations, sit with elders. They're going to give you a whole other sense of time,
Yeah.
of what really matters. in the moment, in hindsight, and being with the littles where they have a whole other sense of presence because it's infinite. That, when you're 11 years old, it just seems like life is infinitely in front of you, or a baby in which really, there is no time.
Yeah.
um Communion is such a great place to be with each other.
Mm. Well said. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, I needed this.
This was great. Anything else? I feel that pull to be in intergenerational community. It's really, yeah, it's really needed for myself. I feel it for my son and our family, and being able to be with other young families, but also the elders, the old ones.
Yeah. um when we just start spiraling about all the things that we have to do and the immediacy of that moment, maybe a very practical thing to do is like, think about all the things that you did do
Mhm.
already. You know what I mean? And give yourself like a different kind of a ratio. Um, and then knowing that, like, and then feeling that fullness in ourselves, because there's no shortage of things that we could do or need to do or want to do. Um, but like a lot, as Ray would say, as my husband would say, a lot of shit has already happened. Let's just take a look here,
Yeah.
and that's really helpful. And then that even just gives you a beat, right? Like that holy pause. Okay, like, let me just, it's like literally one step at a time, one moment at a time. And knowing again that, like, maybe it isn't perfect, but it certainly was good enough. And you definitely cared. You put your love into it, or into that person. And that's what people really leave with. It's like, Maya Angelou said, people don't remember what you did, they remember how they feel in your presence.
Mm.
So in those moments, and it doesn't have to be like spend a week with somebody, but even just like, when you're brushing shoulders or elbows with somebody, taking a moment to somebody you don't know, like, wow, that color looks so good on you, or those earrings are great on you. And having, it's like, those are actually really sparkling little moments in the day, is when you look at somebody and you really see them, and you're extending, like, I see you and I see what's, really cool, and I'm going to tell you about it. Where we tend to live in such like a mono vision, isolated, like, I'm so busy, I just got to get all these things, I'm at the grocery store. It's like, take a moment. um Rama would always say, like, our greatest pain is the sense of separation, and we
Mm.
we all just want to be seen. We can do that for each other, and it feels good. It feels
Yeah.
good to take a moment. Like Ray's grandmother used to say, it doesn't cost a penny to be nice.
So true.
Just a little bit, a little bit of affirmation for each other,
Yeah.
a smile at one another.
Yeah.
I'm sure you get lots of those with your gorgeous little baby. And like the way Luca, he lights up
Yeah.
the space and somebody looks and, or said to you the other day, like, oh, I hope you're enjoying this. They're like, they're enjoying it, your joy through you, through them. Like, um, that sense of nirodha that gets us out of overwhelm is where we're like, whoa, this is so big. This is
Yeah.
so milky. It's so big, it's so rich, it's so multi-layered. Like, look, I am floating in this ocean. What did Rumi say? Like, feel into the tenderness, the buoyancy, what we
Mm.
say, a little ship. Just to be held by the ocean is the greatest luck we could ever have.
Mm. Amen.
Thank you, Shinay, for this.
Thank you. Until next time.
Aloha.